Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's seminar, Hearing Loss and Aging During COVID-19. So my name is Rumiko Suzuki, coordinator at Japanese Social Services. So this e-learning session is co-provided by Momiji Healthcare Society and Japanese Social Services and joined by Ihon Center. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. So this session is recorded, but Q&A and your face and voice will not be recorded. So please refrain from recording or taking photo of this session. And you are muted during the presentation, so please stay muted until the Q&A time comes. And keep your note for any comments or questions during the presentation. And at the Q&A session, please raise your hand for your comment or any question. So you can unmute yourself when your name is called. And the question received via chat will be taken at the Q&A time. So please type your question in chat box and we will take the question from there. And it is up to you to have your video on. However, it is very good for individual psychological well-being to see other faces. And if you choose to not turn on the video, we will indicate when you can unmute yourself during the Q&A session. Okay, and now we would like to introduce hosting organization of today's seminar. So first, Momiji Healthcare Society. So Chie-san, please go ahead. Chie-san, mute.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Chie. I am a client intervention worker at Momiji Healthcare Society. Momiji is a nonprofit supportive housing located in Scarborough. We're serving in English and Japanese and serving seniors and caregivers. We have virtual programs still ongoing, educational sessions, falls prevention, seated exercise, museum tour, and so on. So if you're interested in participating in any of them, just let us know and then we can explain more and then register you. We also have a fundraising event going on every month, and this month is Triichi Bento, $15 per bento fundraising, and you can order by March 18 noon to pick up on March 23rd afternoon. So if you're interested in, please order and have a yummy experience and help Momiji. Thank you.
Thank you, Chie-san. And next is Japanese Social Services. So Japanese Social Service is a nonprofit agency that provides counseling and programs in both English and Japanese. So we are located in the second floor of Japanese Canadian Culture Center, but currently providing service remotely. So you can reach us by phone or email. And every month we are hosting this e-learning seminar on second and fourth Wednesday and posting details on our website. So please check our website on jss.ca for more information. Thank you. And next up, Angela from Ihon Center. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angela. I'm the social worker at Ihon Caregiver Education Support Services. So Ihon is a nonprofit organization. We do have long-term care homes, and also we have community professional support services. So my main job is to provide the support for caregivers. So if you're interested in knowing more about caregiver, how to care for a caregiver, especially for family caregivers, you're welcome to visit our website to get the upcoming events and also the videos of the past educational sessions. So the videos and also our events will be mainly in 3 languages, English, Cantonese, and the Mandarin. Nice to meet you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Okay, so now let me introduce our presenter, Lori Jackson, a registered social worker and a hearing care counselor at Canadian Hearing Services. So Lori, please take away.
Hello, so I'm just going to share my presentation. So today we'll be talking about hearing loss and aging and some of the challenges that the hearing loss and communication has made it more difficult during COVID, especially with masks and distancing. So I work for the Canadian Hearing Services. So you may be aware that we were at one time called the Canadian Hearing Society, so CHS, but essentially our organization, our clients are people who are deaf and hard of hearing, and we've provided a number of different services. So essentially our vision and mission statement is to help reduce barriers and be leading in products and service that help individuals that are experiencing some form of hearing loss to remove some of those barriers to participate in day-to-day life and situations. So the Canadian Hearing Services has been around since 1940. We are a not-for-profit agency and a United Way agency. And we do have some services that have a fee. So for example, we sell hearing aids and we sell different devices that I'll talk about a little bit later. And that money gets reinvested back into programs like mine that do home visiting and services for free. And we're quite unique in terms of what we provide because we're the only agency in North America providing services to people with any form of hearing loss that include mental health supports. My program is called the Hearing Care Counseling Program, but essentially it's for anybody over the age of 55 with a hearing loss. We have audiology, which is testing of the hearing and prescribing of hearing aids. And then for people who have a hearing loss and are still working, we have employment and training. And then we have interpreting services for those who are deaf and captioning, as well as communication devices. And we also have really great, strong partnerships with national organizations. So the great part about this is that we are able to actually meet with the manufacturers of devices. So we as frontline and as social workers, we can actually tell them some of the gaps that are happening with our clients and what's working and what's not, which is actually wonderful. So we're a provincial organization. So we have offices throughout Ontario. And we do have strong partnerships with the government of Quebec. So we provide all of anybody who has OHIP, but has OHIP in Quebec, they are able to get devices through CHS. So a little bit about some of the programs that we have. We have the Hearing Care Counseling Program, which is the program that I work with. So traditionally before COVID, it's a home visiting program. So our role is to go into the home and make sure people are safe. So can they hear the fire alarm, the doorbell? How do they manage communication over the phone? And we also look at their individual hearing loss. So everyone's hearing loss will be a little bit different in how they communicate, and we'll give them some ideas about how to do that and how to stay independent and going to different programs within the community. We also have a store, and that store sells alerting devices. So there's different types of devices that flash, that have amplification to keep people safe and independent within their own homes. And then we have our corporate services, which are more for like the school board. So they go into the schools, they go into long-term care and places of worship to ensure that there's accessibility. And then we have the audiology program, which is testing. And the benefit to having CHS as testing your hearing is because we're not for profit, they don't have the pressure of the clinics out in the community. And we have to be accountable. So a lot of those clinics no longer will have OHIP coverage because it was a delisted service. And so what they're really trying to do, the only way they make money is selling hearing aids. So that's our benefit. We don't have that same pressure. We have mental health supports, as I mentioned, employment education, and general support. So these are for people, general support services is usually for people who are hard of hearing, or English is not their first language, and they're really struggling to apply for different types of funding. And then we have the Ontario Interpreting Services, which has a 24-hour emergency services, and this is for deaf individuals. And CHS actually holds a contract for all of Ontario for all the general physicians, for doctors. And then we have CART. So you may have noticed is sometimes you can see the writing on the bottom of some screens, and that's what CART is. So some of these new programs, as we've evolved into the COVID online world, actually have them built in. So when we think about some of the causes of hearing loss itself, we have medication. So medication generally is strong medication, such as if anybody had cancer and they were having chemotherapy, that can impact hearing loss. If someone's had a hit to the head, they've had an accident, or I had a client who fell down the stairs and hit her head, it can cause a hearing loss. Tumors and strokes. Sometimes if your family, your mother, your father, your grandparents had hearing loss, there's a higher likelihood that you may as well. We have individuals who've been exposed to noise, so that could have been through their work, construction, or maybe they're coming from war countries. They can have a hearing loss. And then one that's often overlooked is diabetics. So diabetes, when people have diabetes, people are worried about their eyes. Well, it's eyes and ears that can be affected because it's both organs. So it can affect hearing loss. And then we have the aging process. So when we age, we can lose some of our hearing, and the medical term for that is called presbycusis. Essentially what that means is a high frequency loss. Low frequencies stay intact, so deep male voices may be very easy to hear, while higher pitched voices can be more difficult. And this happens very gradually, so sometimes it can be hard to recognize. When we look like, how do we know whether or not we have a hearing loss? Often the person with a hearing loss may speak very loudly or too softly. And the reason why they do this is they can't hear their own voice. So they don't know how to regulate their voice themselves. We often will be called into homes because people have their television or their radio too loud. Or sometimes we have people who live in apartments or condominiums and they leave the television on quite loudly and then they fall asleep, and then 3, 4 a.m. other people can hear it. So sometimes that's a good indicator. Another good indicator is that inappropriate responses to questions. So somebody may ask you, are you coming to the presentation today? And you might say, I'm okay, I don't need to go shopping. So to that person, it may seem like there's some confusion. And I always say to my clients, because they're always going to be older adults, is you want to be careful, because often people don't first think that it's a hearing loss. They first think that it's dementia or Alzheimer's. So you never want to be perceived as that. We have people who favor one ear, so they have a better ear, or they have problems on the telephone or maybe hearing the doorbell. And when we are in person, they can sometimes have a harder time hearing when a lot of people are talking. So as the room environment becomes more noisy, it's harder to have a one-on-one conversation. And often what people complain about is, I could hear you speaking. They could hear somebody is saying something, but they can't make out the words. It sounds as though the other person is mumbling. And these are key indicators for hearing loss. And when we think about hearing loss, it affects our whole well-being. And it causes us a lot of stress for the person with the hearing loss, because they're always worried, can I hear? If I'm in a louder environment, how am I going to manage that conversation? And they need to see your face. So this is where COVID makes it very difficult when people are wearing masks, is that when they can see your face, it can be very helpful to help with the communication. Lighting is also an issue. So sometimes it's really important, if you're going to have a conversation with someone who has a hearing loss, is making sure they can see your face and the lighting is there. And It takes a lot of work if you have a hearing loss to focus and pay attention. So often people with a hearing loss will get tired and feel fatigued because they're really focused and concentrating on what's happening. And that visual attention of focusing and trying to pay attention, if there's more than one person, can also be very fatiguing. When we think about the impact of hearing loss, it really affects all of us. It affects our social, our psychological, and our physical. And oftentimes some of these symptoms go unnoticed because people are trying to cope and they don't necessarily always identify it with a hearing loss. And sometimes people aren't ready to get a hearing aid. Sometimes they know that they need one, but they don't know the process. And sometimes when they're diagnosed, they're not really sure what the next steps might be or whether they're willing to take them. And it really impacts your entire life. So one thing I always like to show is how much hearing loss people have. So sometimes people will say to us, I was told I have 20% hearing loss or 50% hearing loss. And that really doesn't mean a lot to us. So if you look at here, this is an audiogram. So this is how they test your hearing. And some people may have already had one. But across the top, it says low tones to high pitches, so 125 to 8,000. That is the tone. So if we think about a piano, 125 would be the low tones and 8,000 would be the very high pitch ones. And then there you have the soft sounds to the loud sounds. That's how much volume. So normal hearing is in the range of -10 to 25, that would be classified as normal. And then we get into a mild, moderate, and moderately severe. Most older adults, if we have this presbycusis, age-induced hearing loss, their low tones generally stay within that normal to mild setting. So, between the 125 to the 500, they hear just fine. But when they get into conversational speech, the 1,000 to 8,000 is when it starts to decline. And this is why sometimes it's hard to understand, because if you're one-on-one with a male, you might say, oh, well, I hear that person just fine. But when I talk to Lori, when she's downstairs, I don't hear her as well. So sometimes it's hard to identify where, and that's part of the reason why. So the other part of the hearing test, if you've ever had a hearing test, there's two parts. One is the audiogram, how much on the piano can you hear? And that's what your hearing aids will be set to if you ever purchase them. That's the customized part. The second part is really the very most important piece. This is where they're looking to see, it's called a word recognition score. And we're trying to determine how well does your brain interpret the sound. This is where part of the clarity comes from. And they're going to ask you words like baseball, hot dog. And what they're doing is seeing how well are you able to hear. And you receive a score out of 100 from there. And you're in the most quiet, soundproof booth. And so, for example, if somebody received a score of 80, that essentially means that they're missing 20% of the words in a perfect environment. So word recognition is really the most important piece of an audiogram. And this is where people will say, oh, my friend has hearing aids and it doesn't work for them at all, but so-and-so has hearing aids and it works well. A lot of times it's this word recognition score. And when people start to have a lower percentage on this, we really want to help them learn how to communicate and what are the questions they need to ask, because this is where it becomes difficult, because you can repeat something over and over again, but they may not be able to understand what's being said. So a high frequency hearing loss or a hearing loss due to aging is called presbycusis. And you see the audiogram. So as I mentioned, that lower frequency, the 125 to 500, generally stays in that normal hearing range, but then it starts to drop off. And these individuals have problems with consonant sounds. So SH, TH, CH, F, birds, bells, so that high-pitched sound. And if you have any grandchildren with whispery sounds, sometimes it can be really hard to hear them. But the low-pitched sounds stay intact. So vowels, traffic, the bus, footsteps, you can hear those. And again, we come back to that, I can hear you, but I can't always make out or understand what you're saying. The one thing to be aware of is that if you do have a hearing loss or you're communicating with someone with a hearing loss, a lot of numbers are consonant sounds. So people have a hard time hearing the 13th, the 14th. And so it's really important for have them repeat them back. The other thing that we find is that our clients who have a hearing loss and are suspected of having some dementia or Alzheimer's, if they have the mini mental health screening, sometimes they fail, even though they don't have a cognition issue. And part of it is they use a lot of numbers, especially the clock assessment, where they say, draw the numbers on a clock and draw the clock at 11:15. So sometimes they actually misunderstand the direction. So when we think about in COVID and we think about how we're communicating, a couple of things to be very aware of is that we want to ensure that we have no background noise. So if your television or your radio is on, you want to be at the hearing aid, not at your ear. That microphone is on the hearing aid. So the person needs to put that microphone and the receiver to there. So a little bit of a demonstration. If you know that you're speaking with someone, you want to try to speak as clearly as possible, not slow, but try to separate out the words. And you want to kind of give a clue when you're going to change topics. So then that way they know that you're saying and talking about something else. If there's any important information, you want to repeat the information back. Did you say I have an appointment on Monday, the 13th at 2? And they would say yes or no, so you can confirm. And when it gets really bad, you can ask them to spell it out. Or most of you I can see on the screen. So that means that you could say to them, could you call me through Zoom or another platform that I can see you? The other part is if you have a speakerphone, sometimes if you're really struggling to hear someone, if you put it on the speakerphone, it almost mimics in person. So it's coming through both sides of your ear. So it can be very helpful, even with hearing aids. If you wear hearing aids and you are wearing your mask, be very, very aware that, and if you wear hearing aids, you've already experienced it's easy to lose your hearing aids. They come right off. So you want to put your hearing aids towards your head and the mask elastics beside them. If you feel that they're coming off frequently, the hearing aids, there are things that are called oto clips that help make it attached to you. Or you can go to the dollar store if it's a behind the ear hearing aid and look for the eyeglass holders that you use for reading glasses that go on and off, and that can prevent them from being lost. So when we talk about other ways to communicate, and just so you know, Chi, this is the one that I was talking about. This is called a pocket talker. And we have been really encouraging community partners and other social workers to be using these, especially if they have to continue to distance. And if we continue to wear masks, I know that that's coming and we're saying no, but let's see what happens. You can, if someone has a hearing aid and you're using this device, you could take the hearing aids off and put the headset on, and that has an extension cord that can be put underneath your mask to be able to communicate a bit better, and you can increase the volume. So we found some success with this. The hospitals actually have these. So if you go to the hospital and you forget your hearing aid, because usually people do in an emergency, you want to ask them for an amplified device to help you communicate and know what's happening, especially in COVID when you're not allowed to bring someone with you. What we always say about having a better conversation is you want to make sure, so if you have a partner with a hearing loss or you live with someone with a hearing loss, is ensuring you have their attention before speaking to them. And you want to face them. so that they can see your face. And you want to try to speak as clearly as possible and slow down. So sometimes we get a little bit excited. I know I do. And you just want to make sure that you slow down, and that way it deciphers the words for you. So a couple of things to know about hearing aids. There is the Assisted Devices Program, and that's through your OHIP, and they will cover $500 per hearing aid every 5 years to the exact date. There's no exceptions. And as of 2011, this is where OHIP has listed all services surrounding hearing aids. So the testing, the writing the prescription, and the filling of the prescription. The only people who currently have funding is us. So CHS has funding at their downtown location at 271 Spadina and at Providence Healthcare in their outpatient services. So if you have hearing aids or you're trying to support someone with a hearing aid, a couple of things to know about trying to troubleshoot them is battery life. So batteries now, especially with those smaller hearing aids, are only lasting about 5 to 8 days. And a couple of recommendations that we make with clients or their families or the people who are supporting them, batteries have a little sticker on them. So we'll say to you, you know what, take that sticker off and put it on your calendar. And then that way you have an idea of how long the batteries are lasting. And especially since we've been at home, maybe you can stretch it out to 9 days. So that way you have a better idea of when you last changed them. And cleaning. So as we, cleaning them are hard. It comes with this little baby brush that's so tiny. You can go to the dollar store and buy yourself a toothbrush. And then that way you can use it to brush it off, and it has a little bit more control. So as you see in the middle one with the wax, you really want to make sure that the hole is clear from wax, because the more wax that's getting in there is blocking the sound from getting to you. Some of them have wax guards, so that's that white thing in the middle, and they do need to be changed. So there's no real blanket statement about how frequently they need to be changed, only because each and every one of us has a different amount of wax that we produce. So some people don't produce any, and some people produce a lot. So sometimes you can get away with using the toothbrush to clean it out, and it's better to clean it out in the morning when it's dry. Now, the one with the little silver behind the ear hearing aids, these ones tend to be the most popular because they're called an open fit. The benefit to these is because they're not a custom ear mold, is that when you have a custom ear mold, it's almost like putting your hands up to your ears. People complain about hearing themselves breathing and talking, where these ones don't do that. But you do need to because it's plastic, you do need to remove those domes and change them. And again, it depends on everybody's how often you use it and how much wax you have. So what happens if a hearing aid is broken? What happens if you're not ready to have a hearing aid yet? So, and I would say, if you're thinking about getting a hearing, always call us and we can tell you what to expect, because I don't think that anybody who doesn't want a hearing aid should hurry up and get one yet, because you have to put the time in to use it, and there is an adjustment time. So there are different ways to use and manage a hearing loss if you're not ready. And so there are these devices. The downfall is that it's all amplification. So we think about that piano is making everything loud, and you may not need that. And there's a cord, so there's a headset and a cord. So that is, but it can help from time to time with different individuals. I also just want to touch a little bit on hearing loss and cognition. So one thing to note is that when people have a hearing loss, they tend to decline mentally faster because they're not being stimulated. And there's a lot of research that goes along with this. Some of it is actually from the Alzheimer's Society of Canada. And I actually put this little quote on here. So you see that Dr. Weinstein did this in 1986. So we think about how long we've known this, but sometimes we don't do anything about it. And cognition, as I mentioned, depending on the hearing loss, can present as confusion and withdrawal and disorientation. So just being aware that how you might be perceived by others may be important. And just because, and for workers, just because someone has a hearing aid doesn't mean that it's working. It doesn't mean that it's current, so their hearing loss could have changed in that time. And just because they don't have hearing aids don't mean they don't need them. So sometimes people will think, oh, okay, I'm fine, but it might not be. And a question that we always get is about tinnitus and hyperacusis. So what is tinnitus? Tinnitus or tinnitus is buzzing or sound in the ear. There is no blanket way of fixing it. So some people hear this. What we will say is certain things will make it worse. So salt, caffeine will increase the tinnitus. When you're in a quiet environment, it will increase the tinnitus. What we always recommend is having some background noise on if someone is suffering from this, and that will help. Hyperacusis is where people are very sensitive to sound. So any noise makes it really bothersome and almost hurts their ears. What I will say, if anybody is experiencing that, is never use earplugs. It will make it worse. And then you can reach out to your family physician or your audiologist to see what other options might be available to you. So one thing I always like to touch on is long-term care. So we generally always know someone in long-term care. It is under the Long-Term Care Act that hearing aids are used, that they are mandated to be used. It's under Section 37. And when you have them, the home is responsible for cleaning them, supporting you and putting them in, etc. And what do? So we provide phone consultations. I'm hopeful in April we're going back into person. If you just want to ask questions, you're more than welcome to give us a call. We counsel about the grief of the hearing loss, the impact to relationships, how to communicate, how to understand your hearing loss. If you're looking at purchasing a hearing aid and you have questions or you're not sure if you'd qualify for funding, we can walk you through some of those things to give you some of those options. And we want to ensure that you're safe and independent in your home. And we also, sometimes we've had clients who have a hearing loss and, a life event happens where now they need a surgery. They may come back to us and say, now I have a surgery. How am I going to manage these conversations? So we absolutely do that, and it's free. So we currently are doing virtual services, as I mentioned. So we do this online or phone calls. So hopefully in the future, we'll be able to do presentations in the future. And we also, at Momiji, before COVID, used to do screenings in person where we come and we screen people. And that would give them an opportunity when they weren't sure if they were ready for hearing aids, where they were at, and get some advice. So everybody wants to know who we're funded by. We're funded by the LIN, the Ontario Health. In Toronto, we're with City of Toronto and United Way. And we also have that fundraising piece. And when I talked about some of those sales of devices, and currently we have language counselors in English, Cantonese, Mandarin, Portuguese, Russian, and French. And these are some of the devices to help you within your home. So in the middle lower one is a fire alarm. And so this has that little disc there. That disc actually shakes you awake. So it goes under your pillow, and that fire thing flashes. So as long as you have updated fire alarms, it will pick up the sound and alert you. Most fires happen at nighttime. And then there are doorbells. So what happens is they press the doorbell, and that black unit above it, you plug in a lamp behind it. So the lamp actually flashes to let you know that someone's at the door. So if you're having in-home services, it keeps you a little bit safe. The other thing I'll say is that if you have a hearing loss and you have a telephone, sometimes it's a great idea to get caller ID. So sometimes it's really hard to know who's calling, and at least with caller ID, you have an idea who's calling you, and you have and that way you're not trying to figure out who it is. For caregivers, we have different types of mat and contacts that can let you know if someone's leaving. So if you have a hearing loss, it can be very stressful to be a caregiver, and there's a number of different devices to help you day to day to do that. So that's it.